Olá a todos.
Welcome to Afro-Latinas United, and welcome to This Might Offend You. In this series, I'll be diving into some topics that might not be commonly discussed, but I believe they are crucial to understanding our identity and navigating the world as Afro-Latinas. I want to talk about things that might be uncomfortable or even controversial to some, but necessary to address. In this series,
We'll also explore the privileges we as Afro-Latinas may have and how we can use them consciously.
In today's video, I want to discuss a topic that has been on my mind for a long time, something I personally experienced growing up: the idea of putting ethnicity before race. This is something I rarely see people talk about, especially in the US context. But for those of us raised outside the US, this perspective can be quite different. Let's break down why that is.
And why it's not something that makes us any less Afro or any less proud of our negritude.
I was raised to prioritize my ethnicity before my race. Let me explain what that means. Growing up as an Afro-Brazilian, I always identified first as Brazilian. That was my ethnicity, my nationality, my culture, and what defined me. My identity as a Black woman, while important, wasn't always the first thing I emphasized when I was growing up. This isn't a denial of race, but it's more of an understanding that where I'm from,
Your nationality or ethnicity often takes precedence.
Now, I fully understand that this is not an American perspective. In the US, race plays a dominant role in identity formation, especially for African Americans and Afro-Latinos. Many Americans are conditioned to put race first because of the country's long history with racism, segregation, and the ways race has been used to divide and oppress people of color.
This focus on race is something that is embedded in the culture, and understandably so.
The Black American experience is rooted in that struggle, and it makes sense that for many people, race would be the primary way they define themselves. But let me be clear, I'm not American. My experience is different, and I've noticed that there's a tendency to assume that the American way of seeing things is universal. In many other parts of the world, including where I come from, ethnicity, nationality, and cultural identity often come before race. It's not that we don't acknowledge our negritude, but we don't always lead with it. I've noticed that there's almost no one who talks about this difference in perspective, even though I know there's a whole group of people who feel the same way I do. There are many of us who prioritize our ethnicity first and see race as something secondary. But here's the thing. This is not about being less Afro or denying any part of our heritage. For me, it's just about how I was raised, how I understand my own identity, and what feels most natural to me. I grew up with pride in my Afro-Brazilian culture, our food, our traditions, and our music. All of these things make up who I am, and my racial identity is part of that, but not the entirety of it. This is a conversation that I feel is rarely had. It almost feels like a taboo topic, as if admitting that you prioritize your ethnicity over your race is something wrong or shameful. But I want to challenge that and break that taboo. I don't believe we should feel like we're less committed to our negritude because of how we choose to identify. For those of us who put our ethnicity or nationality first, I think it's important to recognize that this doesn't make us any less conscious or any less proud of being Afro. There's a wide spectrum of how people relate to their race, and it's shaped by so many factors, including where you're from, how you were raised, and your personal experiences. In the US, there's a strong narrative around race-first identity because of the history of racial discrimination and the ongoing struggles against it. But outside of the US, there's a different narrative, one that often centers around nationality and ethnicity, especially in places with a strong sense of multiculturalism or a long history of mixed-race communities, like much of Latin America. Another important point I want to touch on briefly is the concept of Afro-Latina privilege. Yes, we face challenges as Black women in a world that often discriminates against us, but at the same time, being Afro-Latina often gives us access to certain privileges that we may not always recognize. For example, many of us can navigate different cultural spaces. We can be part of the Latino community,
which sometimes allows us to blend in or code switch in ways that other Black people cannot. Our identities can help us access different cultural and social spaces,
and that's a privilege we should acknowledge. Being bilingual or multicultural can give us opportunities that others might not have. We can connect with a broader range of people and relate to different cultures in ways that aren't always available to others. That's a privilege, and we should be aware of it so we can use it positively and in a way that uplifts not only ourselves, but also our communities. Now, I won't go too deep into this topic today because I plan to discuss Afro-Latina privilege in more detail in another video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. There's so much to unpack when it comes to understanding the unique position we hold as Afro-Latinas. So, I encourage you all to think about how we as Afro-Latinas can embrace our diverse identities while also challenging the narratives that sometimes limit us. I want to break the taboo of prioritizing ethnicity over race, because it's not about being less Afro or less proud. It's about embracing all parts of who we are, our culture, our race, and our identity. In future episodes of This Might Offend You, I'll be talking more about these nuanced topics, but also about the privileges we have as Afro-Latinas and how we can use them consciously and effectively. If this resonates with you, please leave a comment and let's start the conversation. What does identity mean to you? How do you prioritize the different aspects of your identity? Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay proud of all parts of who you are.
Tchau, até a próxima vez!